Morning, everyone. If you wouldn't mind just going and finding a seat, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I just want to welcome everyone. My name is Angie May. I am honored to serve as the board chairperson for the Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to the 2022 Wellness and Epilepsy Conference. As you may already know, there are around 3.4 million people diagnosed with epilepsy in the United States, and about 1 in 26 people will receive a diagnosis of epilepsy during their lifetime. This statistic is particularly powerful to me, as both of my two daughters, Madison and Ashlyn, are living with an epilepsy diagnosis. Madison's here with me today. Like many of you joining us today, I share in our collective vision of utilizing tools, resources, education in order to overcome the challenges of living with epilepsy. Education has always been the primary tool that we believe can change lives and outcomes for people living with epilepsy. We are honored to be able to showcase the amazing speakers that we have lined up for you today, and to hold this event in a very special month, National Epilepsy Awareness Month. I've served as on the board for many years, and I've watched the Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan grow in their capacity to serve the epilepsy community in tangible and so many meaningful ways. I think that this conference is a very primary example of the transformational programming offered here by the Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan. If you are able, we would welcome your gift of support so that we can continue to offer programs such as this. If you'd like to make a gift today, our staff, many of them are here today, will be available with tablets at the registration table where you checked in. You can also look for our holiday appeal, where we are showcasing the story of a very special family. More than anything, we want to thank you for being here today and growing together as a unified epilepsy community. First, I would like to acknowledge and thank our generous sponsors who have helped make this day possible. Our lead outreach sponsor, Henry Ford Comprehensive Epilepsy Program. Our health and resource fair sponsor, Michigan Medicine and C.S. Mott Children's Hospital, Department of Neurology. They said it for me. Our session sponsor, Children's Hospital of Michigan. Our wellness partners, ASI and SK Life Sciences. Our community partners, UCB, Jazz Pharmaceuticals, Beaumont, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, LivaNova, and Synovian. And all of our amazing display booth partners. So thank you so much to all of you. Please help me in joining and giving them a round of applause. Thank you. And how about, before I go any further, how about being back together again in the same space? Cheers to that. It's so nice to be able to be with the community. It's just awesome. Now it is with great pleasure that I introduce this morning's speaker. We are so fortunate to have her with us today, and all the way from Texas. Like, literally, she's going back tonight. So she is a woman who's charismatic, inspirational, and an advocate, Miss Connie Rust. Connie is a relentless disability advocate, sister, daughter, and friend. Growing up with a big sister with cerebral palsy, she has aspired to support families and people with disabilities who face countless barriers to full inclusion in today's world in all spaces and places. After Connie's sister Alex passed away nearly a decade ago, Connie took the steps to transition her career, planning the steps to obtain her MBA and MSW to go into disability advocacy full-time. Connie was diagnosed with epilepsy in high school, and her sister had it for the majority of her life as well. To honor her legacy and the shared diagnosis they have with one another, Connie aspires to empower all people with disabilities, including people with epilepsy. Today, through her work at Joshen as a customer service success manager. Joshen provides employees, people, leaders, and teams to get support on all aspects of disability and neurodiversity in the workplace, and strives to close the gap to ensure that all people can bring their fullest disabled and neurodivergent selves to work and be respected, appreciated, and admired for it. That's awesome. I know her presentation will empower and inspire you. Without further ado, please help me welcoming Connie Rust to the stage.
Awesome. First of all, thank you so much for having me today. It's super heartwarming to be around so many family members, supporters of epilepsy, people who have epilepsy, and professionals with a passion for better understanding and helping people cope with epilepsy. I'm in awe of this room already, and I'm so excited and humbled that I get to be in front of you today. I've so loved getting to work with different members of the Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan, and have felt so incredibly welcomed by you all this morning. And I'm so excited to get to be here and share more about me, my story, my own relationship to epilepsy, and to kick off today's Wellness and Epilepsy Conference. I'm Connie Rust, a customer success manager at an organization called Joshin, which I'll get into more about what that is in just a few moments. I got my MBA and MSW fairly recently, and I'll discuss how two seemingly very different curriculums really meshed well to get into the line of work that I'm in today. So I'll start with some fun things about me. I love to travel. I've had the privilege of going a lot of places across the US for both work and for fun. I mostly love traveling places where I have friends dispersed, getting to see them in their home environments, and doing the things I love with friends they've made. My favorite places to travel are where they're doing the things they love and with the friends they've made. My favorite places to travel are also where there are plenty of outdoor activities. My husband Taylor and I also joke that we sometimes tend to just travel places only to do the same things that we would just do at home. We do try to visit botanical gardens at each place we visit, along with local breweries and restaurants, which, like I said, are things we just typically do at home. I also love coffee. You might have just seen me before I came up on stage, but I was like chugging it. I go to bed excited about my coffee the next morning. Seriously gets me excited about waking up each morning. I haven't quite gotten to the point of roasting my own coffee beans, but we're pretty close. I make my own syrups and flavors at home, like chai, lavender, and vanilla. I have a French press, a pour-over, espresso machine, and coffee machine. My kitchen kind of looks like a science lab when it comes to making coffee at times. I've even attempted to make oat milk at home. And during graduate school, I worked at a coffee shop to really grow and get better at making coffee. It's now a core part of how and why I love hosting people in my home. I also love French fries. They're my favorite food. I'm not the harshest critic of French fries. I actually had French fries last night, like in my salad. And I usually eat them anytime they're in front of me. But if you're curious, my preference is I like a medium-width French fry, not particularly a shoestring fry, and not particularly like a steak fry. Skin on preferred. Some light seasoning or sea salt is always great. I once babysat this girl in high school who was quite the diva, but she would ask for Chick-fil-A fries well done or double fried. I wouldn't recommend doing that during a high traffic drive-through time, but it is quite tasty, and I'll dabble on occasion if I'm feeling like a diva too. I also love to hike. Let's be clear, I don't do extreme hiking or camping, but I do love a 5 to 10 mile hike, some scenic overviews, some lakes, a place to sit and eat lunch and just be still. Every trip I go on, I always look up some of the best hiking trails in the area and try to check them off my list. Even if the areas aren't particularly conducive to hiking, every place has green space to try to make something work. I also love Texas. As you know, I'm from there. I was born and raised in Houston, and I went to college in Austin. My parents have been in the same house my entire life, and I now live about 15 minutes away from them, just outside of downtown Houston. Most of my extended family is in Texas too. I can't say I have any family in Michigan, but I've had a warm welcome here so far. It's typically pretty warm most of the year, so it's been quite the adjustment being here the last day. Going back to hiking, I honestly grew to love hiking when I was in Austin for college. Houston's elevation is pretty flat and we're at sea level, but there are some places to hike, emphasis on some. I count hikes to include long trail walks too, so we'll keep the definition of hiking pretty subjective. If you're wearing hiking boots or really an athletic or tennis shoe, I count that as a hike. Lastly, I love the Houston Astros. As many of you might know and have probably heard Houstonians brag about pretty endlessly recently, we won the World Series the other week. Just had to throw it out there while I had the opportunity while I was up here. Thanks for listening. Now you're probably wondering how any of this ties to why we're here today. As my introduction warranted, I'm also a disability advocate. I've been a personal advocate for nearly a decade, and a professional advocate for the last 4 years. Initially, I got involved in some nonprofit and volunteer work for disabilities, supporting some incredible organizations, really enhancing belonging for people with disabilities. These nonprofit and volunteer opportunities were great, but continued to leave me frustrated, like the after-work support I provided would just never be enough. Families and people kept experiencing barriers to living their full lives, and I grew frustrated like there was no optimal solution. I reached a point where my full-time career needed to be in disability advocacy, and I took the tactical steps to make a change. I was in a role after college which was, on paper, absolutely incredible, but it just was not giving me the purpose that I needed. I felt burnt out and not able to dedicate my full self to volunteer work outside working hours for disability advocacy work. I realized I needed to pivot my career to disability inclusion entirely. How I was going to do it was to be determined, though in my mind, the only way to do it was to set a goal of starting a nonprofit. It's at this point that I applied to graduate school for my MBA and MSW with a variety of roles focusing on disability. When I officially made the switch, I left my job and started graduate school, where I immersed myself in a variety of environments, realizing that nonprofit work was critical and important to progress disability inclusion, but not the only way. I've been in government-funded autism and mental health clinics, where I interacted with hundreds of clients with autism and intellectual disabilities, worked on social skills, implemented a coffee employment training program. Can you tell that that was my idea? And continues to impact nearly 80 clients a year. The conversations and memories I had were so incredibly fun. I worked heavily in a clinical capacity, and I definitely took stories home with me over and over and over. It was tough work. Undocumented clients of mine faced barriers to American citizenship based on their intellectual disability and speaking ability, in situations they were not in control of in a complex and polarizing system that left them in fear. Clients of mine with autism would come to therapy experiencing depression alongside their autism, having been fired as a result of workplace meltdowns with managers at disability-inclusive organizations, but unfortunately at the micro level with managers who are not properly trained on how to support them. And these people cycled between finding jobs and came to therapy struggling with mental health implications of that experience. At the government agency level, turnover was incredibly high and resources and funding incredibly low. I learned so much that continues to inform where I am today. I've also been in residential vocational community environments. A beautiful nonprofit residential community outside of Houston provided belonging for adults after they aged out of school, where resources have historically been limited. It was a very disability-inclusive environment across all disabilities, with a stable schedule of activities and work to the extent people desired to. It ran like a summer camp across a lifespan, and as a summer camp kid myself, which I'll get into, I absolutely loved it. I learned a lot working here too that informs where I am today in my career. On a personal level, we had a huge horticulture program that sourced plants and poinsettias across Texas during the holidays. And the skills I learned there frankly informed how I continue to grow and propagate plants in my own house. I also learned how to make dog treats, and do make the occasional 45-minute drive to the residential community to pick up those dog treats, but I do confess that I do sometimes make them at home. I also have experience in nonprofit autism-focused schools, where I supported students aging out of school with job coaching and job placement throughout Houston, working with our state workforce commission. Working at a nonprofit closely with that workforce commission had its own pressures. The workforce commission did have quicker turnaround time expectations for job placements, but we also really strived to place people in the right environments, and at times those goals came to clash with one another. When we did have the right supports from the workforce commission, which often varied in experience from one student to another, the feeling of placing students in jobs that aligned with their passions and goals was absolutely amazing, and coaching them to be successful in interviews and in their placements was really worthwhile. I also worked in accident and trauma hospitals. There were some heavy and life-altering stories that came out of that experience for patients I worked with, some of which might bring you here today, or you might have really close experience with. Really, all of these areas you might have really close experience with. I supported in a case management capacity and worked across all disciplines with doctors and therapists, and loved my experience there too. Similar to my government-funded experience, I worked heavily in a clinical capacity, and if you have a story to share an experience in your hospital, please feel free to reach out to me and share it with me. What I learned was invaluable, and the people I interacted with, the resources I had the opportunity to share with families to ensure they transitioned home safely with the proper supports, and really processing new norms outside the hospital with families was tough but really invaluable work. I'm so glad I explored these several environments, because I learned just how many different areas touch disability beyond the classroom. I thought for a long time that special education was truly the extent to which disability curriculum existed for a long time. And as I mentioned, nonprofit work was the extent to which my MBA and MSW would be valuable for doing disability inclusion work. I did come to realize, though, that a lot of my prior experiences had one thing in common. They're either about training to integrate or assimilate people with disabilities into the world, or keeping people with disabilities with one another, not necessarily training non-disabled people to accept and understand disabilities either. I want to break that down more. To be clear, I think all these supports should exist, but I believe there's a way for innovation and transformation to change hearts and minds. At government-funded clinics, teaching social skills is invaluable, and providing support when people are fired due to meltdowns is also invaluable work. But what if we address the root cause of the problem by teaching people to adjust their social expectations person to person? For neurodivergent people at the micro level, trained managers, and at the micro level, trained managers to support people with disabilities in their workplaces, fostering inclusion and ensuring the work is done both ways. At the residential community, what if the real world was safe enough so that all people with disabilities of all kinds could be integrated and thrive in all spaces and places? This might sound idealistic, but it is tangible. At my experience supporting job coaching and placement at autism-focused schools, what if recruiters were taught to adjust their interview processes for disabilities and ensure disability inclusion all steps of the way, in job applying and onboarding, in addition to ongoing monitoring between a job coach, workforce commission, and job trainer for the autistic or disabled person or client? The way the system is built now is a one-sided relationship. Moving the needle on progress is truly about bridge building to ensure people with disabilities don't carry the emotional labor of educating people on their own disability experience all the time. It's about people doing the work to understand the disability community too and becoming allies, and ensuring all people are educated on moving the needle on disability inclusion so people who have the privilege of ignoring the disability community simply cannot anymore. As I came to this realization, I learned more about the innovative and socially impactful organizations, but few of which included disability. It was around this time, perfectly timed with my full-time job hunt after graduate school, that I found Joshin, which fills that gap that I came to notice and truly has done the groundwork in progressing disability advocacy and inclusion. People can come to Joshin and gain resources that are so often word of mouth or difficult to access or comprehend to ensure that people with disabilities or their loved ones are not the only ones doing the work of changing minds and hearts. I'm so proud to work for an organization that is really trying to reduce barriers for support for disability and neurodivergence. Joshin provides a support system for disability and neurodivergence in workplace and in life. Whether you have a disability, have a loved one with disability, or a manager or an aspiring ally with disability, Joshin supports companies, employees, and family members with specialized care, virtual coaching, on-demand disability education, and training. Our coaching and training ensures that leaders and inspiring allies can come to Joshin, ask the questions they've been scared to ask, knowing that we foster a safe space to learn and truly unpack stigma, and grow to unpack stereotypes person to person, create goals and steps for inclusion for the people they work with in their teams and leadership responsibilities. People who have disabilities themselves or have a loved one can also seek specialized care and coaching, ensuring that they can navigate those tough conversations, accommodation needs, and more with their manager or team members before it's too late. We have an expansive coaching network today of coaches with lived, professional, and licensed experience, supporting members and caregivers with specialized experience, providing safe and quality care for members. Our navigation team is also providing local, state, and community resources and referrals to members, whether through support groups, government benefits, and more. Truly, I'm so proud and excited of the comprehensive support we provide, and in my role, get to witness the member impact day after day. By being in the employer space and working with companies, we can ensure that managers, team members, and employees all have access to Joshin, and they get the support they need to bring their best selves to work on top of caring for their own disability or neurodivergent needs. Joshin sets out to support 1 in 5 families with a loved one or disability, and nearly 1 in 3 in the workforce that is connected to disability or neurodivergent need. In addition, 100% of employees can become disabled at any moment or receive a new diagnosis, making the disability community the largest minority group, and the only group anyone can become a part of at any time. we're growing and continue to partner with companies across industries, including Best Buy, to impact employees from the warehouse level to the retail and corporate level across a variety of disabilities, transforming workplace cultures and building belonging for employees with disabilities, and fostering a safe place for self-disclosure at the micro level through our partnerships. So the backstory on Joshin, the founders, which have quickly become mentors and friends of mine, Melanie and Melissa, grew up in rural Minnesota with their older brother that had developmental disabilities and epilepsy. His name was Josh, and his favorite holiday was April Fool's Day, hence the name Joshin. Melanie and Melissa have been everything from sisters to direct care providers to working moms and understand what's needed to care for disabled neurodivergent people. Growing up, it was hard for them to find reliable and quality care for their brother, so they're often the ones caring for him. After his passing 12 years ago, they felt a huge hole in their lives and decided to do something for Josh. They left their careers and came together and started a company in the Medicaid space as residential care providers, and through that, they saw that technology was evolving rapidly in other industries. You had transportation, groceries, or anything you needed, all with the push of a few buttons within an app, but that was lacking in the disability space. They knew that they could make an even bigger impact by bringing a care tech solution that supports the care and well-being of a historically underrepresented community, so they created Joshin. Melanie and Melissa's story is shockingly similar to that of my own, which I'll get into in just a bit, but I admire the work they've done and the work we will continue to do together, and I'm so grateful for the remote work environment that we're all in, that I get to do work with them all the way in Texas while they're based in Minnesota, along with our global team. So you're going to really gather today that I'm a people person. When I'm not working with people during the day, I'm watching people through movies and shows, constantly analyzing my surroundings and interacting with people. Hence my role, customer success manager, customer. Typically, when I shut down my work, computer after work, I'm either chatting with people, hearing people talk through conversational podcasts, or watching TV shows analyzing people. It's the extrovert in me, I can't help it. Something that I'm particularly passionate about in my disability advocacy is authentic representation of disability in media, television, and film. Some shows and diagnoses have had more progress in this arena, and definitely doing this better than others, with epilepsy having some progress to make in this area, unfortunately. In the US today, 1 in 4 people, or 26%, have a disability, yet only 3.1% of characters on screen are disabled. In children's television, representation is even worse. Less than 1% are represented with disabilities. Too often, actors depict being in wheelchairs that are not actually in wheelchair users in real life. Or they might depict having autism when they don't in real life, or depict having other personality disorders when they don't in real life either. There's so much room for growth, as more than 95% of all characters with disabilities seen on television are played by non-disabled actors. So I'll highlight some of the 5% that are doing this right through a quick breakdown of some of my favorite movies and shows that are doing this well, that I've researched and that I've monitored the disability community's opinion of. I'm going to highlight 3 shows, 2 movies, and 2 short films. As We See It on Amazon Prime, I don't know if you've seen it, is a show that has aired for 1 season that follows Jack, Harrison, and Violet, who are 20-something roommates on the autism spectrum, as they strive to get a job, keep a job, make friends, fall in love, and navigate a world that eludes them. With the help of their families, aid, and sometimes even each other, these roommates experience setbacks and celebrate triumphs on their own unique journeys toward independence and acceptance. This show was made by the same creators from Parenthood, which before digging into my advocacy, I thought was portraying autism just fine in one of the characters. However, the character with autism in the show actually does not have autism in real life. I do admire that the creators did receive feedback from that show to create As We See It, which is really changing the path and ensuring more accurate representation. Special is a show with Ryan O'Connell, who plays a young gay man with cerebral palsy, striving for independence from his mother, and the dynamic between them as she is the single parent and his primary caregiver. He branches out in hope of finally going after the life he wants, and so does she as she comes to terms with her tendency towards codependence in the caregiving relationship. This show not only has representation with cerebral palsy, but also physical disability and autism, This show has aired for 2 seasons. Everything's Going to Be Okay is a show with 2 seasons on Hulu, with Australian 20-something Nicholas, who is left to take care of his 2 American teenage half-sisters after the death of their father. Nicholas hasn't been particularly present in his siblings' lives, and now his sisters have to cope with not only a devastating loss, but the reality that their ill-equipped brother is all that they have. And Everything's Going to Be Okay, one of the lead characters is autistic. This show also had creators behind the camera who had direct experiences with the disabilities portrayed in the show. And the combination of having actors and creators with lived experiences made this show stand out and recognized for its work. I love that this is highlighted because disability representation is so much more than what is shown on camera, but across all levels of involvement in production. I am sad to share this, but all 3 shows I shared were unfortunately canceled after between 1 to 2 seasons. However, we can foster change here. We can share these shows widely and normalize disability so that shows like these become more mainstream and less unfamiliar. Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution is a Netflix documentary film about a groundbreaking summer camp that galvanizes a group of teens with disabilities to help build a movement, forging a new path toward greater equality. This spirited look at grassroots activism is executive produced by President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. You know I happy sobbed my eyes out because, like I said, I love a summer camp moment, and this movie is stacked with pioneers of the disability rights movement like Judy Heumann that have paved the rights for progress, including representation in film, media, and policy that we have today. In CODA, a daughter named Ruby is a child of deaf adults, abbreviated CODA. Ruby is the only hearing person in her deaf family. When the family's fishing business is threatened, Ruby finds herself torn between pursuing her passion at Berklee College of Music and her fear of abandoning her parents. CODA won at the Oscars last year for Best Picture, and Crip Camp was nominated at the Oscars the year before for Best Documentary. Something interesting about Crip Camp is that while nominated, there was no ramp to access the stage had they won the Oscar, which the main characters would have needed. My Disability Roadmap is an op-doc published by the New York Times starring Samuel Habib. It is about the precarious path to adulthood for people with disabilities. In this film, Samuel Habib seeks out guidance from America's most rebellious disability activists. What I love about this short film is that it's free through the New York Times website, and so is the next one I'll introduce. It is so profoundly educational and really highlights the power of assistive technology and how non-disabled people often treat people with disabilities who are unable to speak. Samuel is an adult man who relies on assistive technology. He's absolutely hilarious, and you gain a glimpse in his day-to-day experiences, being undermined given how severe his disability seems or appears to others, but also how he has channeled that frustration into powerful activism. In another New York Times op-doc, or opinion documentary, James Robinson introduces us to Yvonne Short, who's legally blind. But unlike the stereotype of the blind living in a lightless world, Miss Short, like most other legally blind people, lives in a very nuanced existence between those who see well and those who can't see a thing. Miss Short has retinitis pigmentosa, a disease that causes progressive loss of sight. She can see some things some of the time, depending on various factors, including the amount of ambient light, her distance from the object, and the object's location in her field of vision. In this short film, Miss Robinson simulates what it's like to be Miss Short, navigating her world with progressively declining eyesight, but also recognizing what she has gained even as she has lost something so precious. This film, as I mentioned, is also free at the New York Times website and taught me so much about vision loss and shows you the experience to the screen of the vision experience of people with this particular diagnosis and debunks myths around vision loss. Something else I get particularly passionate about when it comes to movies and shows is the portrayal of seizures in films. My husband loves horror films. And I don't particularly. And when we first started dating, he was trying to convince me to watch the movie Babadook. Not sure if any of you have seen it. Instantly I said, I don't know, horror movies really frequently have seizures in them. To which he disagreed. Sure enough, one of the actors had a seizure in the film. Not portrayed by an actor who had epilepsy either. Quickly I learned that no idea is original, and that there's a ton of literature and research on this particular subject. At a high level, seizures and epilepsy have been portrayed in film since 1900, in television since 1950, and depiction has not particularly improved as scientific understanding has of epilepsy. The way in which it's often depicted is that it shows people as being possessed by something evil, and the actors that are portraying epilepsy do not have epilepsy themselves. And there's typically no consult between medical professionals or people with lived experience along the filming process, like there is with other diagnoses. The recurrence of falsely portrayed seizures is so often to me. Maybe it's because of just how much content I absorb, but I also think it's truly because of how easy of a scare tactic it is, especially in certain genres. Most people under 40 years of age will never witness a seizure, and the way that seizures are portrayed in media have astounding consequences on common perceptions and misunderstandings of epilepsy. They evoke emotional reactions, fear, support stereotypes, and drive false narratives. How many of you have shared you have epilepsy with someone and they reacted in fear? For some of you in this room, epilepsy is a non-visible or non-apparent disability that catches people by surprise. Given stigma around disability, which media further perpetuates, the fear is only amplified, especially when media does not provide any education around how to support a person having a seizure. I also get really pumped up about photosensitivity when it comes to media and disability advocacy. Photosensitivity, I recently learned, doesn't actually impact a high percent of people with epilepsy, and I think me frankly not realizing the low prevalence is likely because I had my own false generalizations of epilepsy. I get so frustrated when I see a warning for photosensitivity, nearly 5 episodes into a 10-episode show, only to be prompted that just halfway through a season, a person with epilepsy should be advised to skip an episode due to strobe lighting effects. I believe this is a form of ableism. These warnings do not fall on empty audiences and do impact people. However, people have come to believe that over time, accessibility for disability is not accessibility for everyone, when in fact that could not be further from the truth. Additionally, some people can buy a movie ticket and then come into that movie, and the warning is at that point, after purchase, that it's not recommended for photosensitive viewers to watch that movie. How can we advocate for access for all? We can make our voices heard by commenting, writing opinion pieces, posting in response to films we watch, doing research on what we're watching and responding accordingly. Writing directors on social media, with movies having their own Facebook pages, Twitter pages, Instagram pages, and Reddit pages. Using media as a form of grabbing attention from people, and using it as a means of advocacy to ensure you let people know that the people you love's viewing experience is impacted by a lack of representation or photosensitivity warnings more than creators might realize. Many of you in the room are true experts of your own epilepsy experience and can drive meaningful change in film and media by making your voices heard in that industry to correct wrongful opinions and stigma to make meaningful change. Software exists to test photosensitivity, and film directors can work alongside medical professionals to ensure that scenes are adapted for photosensitive viewers. Case in point, this is the Disability Pride flag. This was updated just this year to reflect updates for photosensitive people. The older lightning bolt version of the flag, which I won't show here, was adapted this year because it causes a strobe and flicker effect when scrolled on electronic devices, and it can be a trigger for seizures, migraines, disorientation, and other types of eye strain. The current version is designed to lessen the chances of flicker effects, nausea triggers, and improve visibility for color blindness. It was updated just this year in response to making their concerns heard. Do you see how valuable collective feedback can be? On the flag, the parallel stripes represent solidarity within the disability community. The 5 colors represent diversity within disability and different experiences, including blue for mental illness, yellow for neurodiversity, including cognitive and intellectual disabilities, white for invisible and undiagnosed disabilities, red for physical disability, and green for sensory disabilities. Now you might be wondering how I became such a super fan of all things disability advocacy. Was it a random occurrence that I just woke up and wanting to do this one day? Did it fall into my lap? Not necessarily. You see, like Melanie and Melissa that I mentioned earlier, the founders of Joshin, I'm a sister to disability. This is my older sister, Alex, and I. Alex had cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and scoliosis. She passed away nearly a decade ago while I was in college in Austin. She died just shy of her 23rd birthday, and I'm so grateful that I got to be at her bedside when she died, as it was while I was home during Christmas break. Alex always went to different schools than me growing up, rode different buses, went to more doctor's appointments, and had more health issues than me. I was a built-in caregiver at times for her, which my love of ebbed and flowed for at times. In my angsty teenage years, I resented it some days while friends hung out together. But as I grew older, I grew to understand just how hard my parents worked to ensure we all lived fulfilled lives, despite just how expensive it was to maintain the highest quality of life for her and for all of us. Alex couldn't communicate with her words, but she could with her eyes and her vocal cords. She could express emotion when sad and had the most contagious laugh when she thought something was funny. She had the most sincere eye contact and had the biggest crush on a boy in her class growing up. She had the same classmates for nearly 10 years with the same teachers until she aged out of the school system, and unfortunately supports nearly stopped for her, and she was mostly home during the day. That was isolating. My parents did their absolute best, but it was hard. Nearly overnight, she lost her friends she saw each and every day. At one of the places I worked, my eyes welled up the first day. I reunited with her crush and some of her old teachers, who were some of the most influential people in her life, and some of the last people in the hospital room with our family before she died. Grief comes in cycles of such joy and sadness that she isn't here anymore. I'm so glad to have connections with her, to people in my life that were then, in the now, and have safe places and friendships to remember my sister with, including my husband, who never knew my sister, but has so closely come alongside me in his own work of doing disability advocacy too, and has empathy and understanding beyond words. Through loss, it's amazing what I've gained, and I'm grateful that, like Melanie and Melissa, I've channeled my grief and loss into identifying the gaps to work on a collective mission toward disability advocacy to alleviate barriers where my own family had them in our lives too. Over time, something I've come to fully realize is that my advocacy includes me too. Like my sister, I have epilepsy, and I was diagnosed in high school. I like to think that our shared diagnoses keep us linked together in the work I continue to do, and motivates me more than ever to continue to honor our experiences together. For a long time, I had a skewed perception of disability, focusing on disabilities in my advocacy that are visible or apparent. But did you know that nearly 20% of people have an invisible or non-apparent disability? That includes many of us in this room who have epilepsy. If the word disability feels like a bad word or a word you don't prefer to use, that's okay, I've been there. Over time, I've come to learn that I've been disabled by my surroundings, stories which I'll get into shortly. I didn't own my disability diagnosis, and I refused to disclose for years. Several people have reacted to me in shock, concern, and fear when I would tell them I had epilepsy. Some places, including workspaces, haven't been safe to disclose it because people haven't been educated about disability or there's been stigma present. My epilepsy, juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, or JME, is characterized by jerks or seizures typically happening within 1 to 2 hours of waking up in the morning or after a nap, which are shock-like and irregular movements. Sometimes the movements, which only happen in the fingers, make me look clumsy or prone to dropping things, which I'll share more about in some stories. In about 1 in 5 people, myoclonic jerks occur on one side of the body. I'm not 1 in 5, and they happen on my right side. Not all muscle jerks are seizures. Many people have isolated muscle jerks that occur as they're falling asleep. These non-seizure movements are also called hypnic jerks. I get these on occasion, and they include rapid eye blinks for me as well. Lack of sleep and fatigue, primarily after drinking too much alcohol, are the most powerful causes of myoclonic jerks and generalized tonic-clonic seizures, and JME. Mental and emotional stress are also common triggers, especially excitement or frustration. There's a running joke among my friends and family that no matter what news people break to me, good or bad, or life-altering, my reaction is always fairly flat. I think that's a gift to my particular diagnosis. I'm generally an optimistic person, but you won't find me getting overly excited or overly mad about anything. I'm able to brush things off and quickly move on. Some people with JME have seizures that are triggered by flickering light, such as strobe lights at dances, TV, video games, or shining light through trees, or reflecting off ocean waves or snow. If you have this diagnosis, feel free to come up to me after this and chat. I believe it's the most common form of epilepsy, impacting between 5 to 10% of people with epilepsy. I frankly don't know anyone with it. I know a movie that falsely portrays it, but that's it. My epilepsy informs my relationship to the world and my day-to-day life. Not just the medication I take morning and night, but the activities I do, the intention with which I do them, and how I go about explaining myself and setting boundaries when necessary. Not only do I need to be careful about getting in and out of bed every day, getting up slowly, but also try to manage my stress the best way I can. Due to my epilepsy, I'm not allowed to give blood or donate bone marrow, having to explain why I can't be as philanthropic as I want to be when I want to, getting strange looks sometimes from people who are trying to peer pressure me, only to be pigeonholed into explaining my diagnosis at different blood drives or at a music festival when I was forced or asked to donate my bone marrow. My memory can also be foggy sometimes. I take notes like I'm closed captioning a meeting sometimes, and break them down into tasks afterward. I try to carefully pace my days so I don't overdo it, but let's be real, I'm not perfect, and I overdo it often. It's in my DNA. Both funny and frustrating, I do have some stories to tell. A requirement for exploring my diagnosis was staying up all night to get an EEG done. I probably should have added earlier in my presentation that I do love to sleep, and I'm not at all a night owl. I never pulled an all-nighter for my graduate school studies. For undergraduate, I did, and how I never had a seizure at that point while I was in Austin is, I recognize, a miracle. Anyway, my mom and I got to my neurologist's office early, and I hadn't eaten breakfast yet. I chose a fruit cup from the limited options, with cup in hand, with a gently placed lid on top. Walking toward the waiting area, I had the cup in my right hand, and as I mentioned, my JME hand jerks typically happen on my right side, so you can imagine what ensued after pulling an all-nighter. Grapes, pineapple, honeydew, and cantaloupe spill out to my right while walking on the second floor stairwell. The carpet in the waiting room was just wet with sticky fruit juice and grapes rolling from the second floor stairwell to the first floor. I was a delirious and embarrassed teenage mess. My mom gracefully said I could sit down while she took care of it. I, to this day, have never looked at a fruit cup the same, and that was nearly 12 years ago. It was the most dramatic toss, and for those who are not in the neurology unit waiting room, like the dermatology one, must have thought it was the most angsty and defiant teenager moment ever, just throwing my fruit cup on a whim. In high school, we had a huge tennis tournament and did a sleepover at a friend's house the night before with the girls on the tennis team. We were playing our rival high school the next day, and I went to middle school with a bunch of people at the rival high school that I'd been texting about seeing during the tournament, one of which is my crush that I was so excited about seeing and had been preparing to see and been overthinking every possible interaction with. After a late night of hanging out and watching movies and probably some prank calls, we woke up the morning of the tournament to begin getting ready. And I had a seizure in front of all the girls at the sleepover on the tennis team. All I remember next is that I was lying at home on my parents' couch, humiliated and embarrassed that I didn't get to go to the tournament, and that my friends saw my seizure. No one really asked about it or asked how I was doing later that day. At the time, I told people I didn't get to see from my middle school that I got sick and couldn't make it, not that I had a seizure. I didn't know what I necessarily wanted or needed from the people at the time that all this happened, but I can safely say that my avoidance of addressing my seizure entirely like nothing happened was hurtful to me. These are my good friends and the people I saw just a couple days later back on the tennis courts acting like nothing happened. For years after, I was paranoid that they were judging me or scared of me, since I never brought it up. I think sometimes we can convince ourselves that suppressing embarrassing moments is helpful and will help us heal, but in fact, that's not the case. And talking it out builds understanding. If you're an ally to epilepsy or a loved one to it, lean in and support your friends with epilepsy following a seizure, and don't just act like it didn't happen. Speaking for myself, I internalized shame from that experience for a long time, until I started to more freely talk about my epilepsy in my personal and professional life. Later that day, after my seizure, it was a Friday night, and I canceled my plans with friends to be with my family. My best friend had a softball game in the playoffs, and I went to cheer her on, with my dad driving me because of my seizure. That late in high school, I was quite embarrassed, as most friends were without their parents and drove with friends. It was the only softball game my dad had attended my whole high school career. It was so selfless for him to go so I could go watch my friend. But I quickly did that thing where he paid for my ticket at the entrance, then I scurried off to be with other friends, saying that he and I were together because he just really wanted to go. I share this story because that while I'm embarrassed I brushed my dad off in that moment, I think like any of us would around that age, I so badly wanted approval from others and wanted to fit in like the majority of others. I so badly wanted to camouflage my epilepsy and the consequential occurrences that came with it, like not being able to drive, surrounded by peers being able to drive, and having forced quality time with family, surrounded by friends, spending quality time with friends, and more. My husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, likes to do this thing where he dips me so low to the ground that he not so gracefully places me on the ground while dancing at weddings. I'm really not quite sure I let him get away with it so much, but I do. The day after this wedding, I did have a seizure. We were staying out of town with a large group of friends on a farm with the cutest farm dogs. We came back after a long weekend, and I came home to my house and took a nap. After waking up from my nap, I had a seizure. I don't remember gaining consciousness, but I woke up in my room, which was upstairs. I walked downstairs to my living room and mumbled some words which concerned my roommate. She noticed I was acting off and called my boyfriend, Taylor, who lived a few minutes down the street, and came over. When he came over, they attempted to use my Face ID to unlock my medical insurance card app, but I kept moving. I then somehow, on the last attempt, was able to key in my password to get them access, and Taylor rushed me to the ER. Taylor suspected I had a seizure, but kept asking me at this point if I had, and he didn't realize I wasn't particularly adherent to my meds at the time, and I wasn't owning that I just had a seizure. Instead, I was making jokes. We hadn't yet talked about what my experience was of having seizures was like, and not knowing what it was and assuming the worst, he took me to the ER. Both he and my roommate didn't know how long my seizure was, had no education around my epilepsy, and they did it out of love. A casual $3,000 in medical bills later, we have resolved it, but it was not without some choice words from my mom, who drove to the ER to meet us, saying to Taylor that he certainly overreacted. Now that's a protective mom to two children with seizure disorders. To say that Taylor is a bit more educated now is an understatement. That was my last seizure. The tremors do tend to warn me to be more compliant with my medication before I have a seizure in the case of my JME. I share this because I'm incredibly stubborn, as I've mentioned. I'm also cheap. So movie ticket, I definitely stay in the theater and try to close my eyes at times. Not proud. I was trying to avoid the ER, but instead that only amplified the worry of Taylor. This is also something that was in my locus of control. Managing my medication with my JME at the time was manageable with my diagnosis. I just wasn't particularly compliant. I'm not and was not a rebellious kid at all. I'm actually a pretty good goody two-shoes and was a super high performer and hard worker. I think my non-compliance was just about the only rebellious thing I've ever done, and sometimes that's how I channel that energy. I'm not proud of it, but saying it out loud to confess to anyone who might relate to that. Growing up, camp was my life, as I've referenced a couple times. I've mentioned it several times at this point. My identity, my friends, my year-round social life, my everything. It's wild how 2 weeks a year for 13 years informed who I was and continues to through different friendships that I have today. Once I was diagnosed with epilepsy in high school, my medication regimen changed on my camp application, and that was truly like a scarlet letter among the staff who knew me for years and years, and I was ashamed. People never had to wear life jackets in the water for water activities, but the year I got diagnosed was the year I did and no one else had to. I even tried to sneak around not wearing one, and I got yelled at in front of my peers for not wearing one, rather than pulled aside and talked to. I know the person who yelled at me felt like they were protecting me, but the people pleaser in me that continues to perpetuate today just wished to blend in, and that one life jacket out of hundreds of kids and staff definitely was not it. In high school, college, and at camp, people love a strobe light without warning. Buy one over the counter. Pay a cover charge, there's a strobe light. Buy a concert ticket, there's a strobe light. Spontaneous dance party, strobe light. Haunted house, strobe light. Honestly, an opinion of mine, maybe a hot take, is that police lights should come with a photosensitive light warning, because those basically feel like strobe lights to me. Feels dangerous, even though they're trying to be safe. We talked about it in movies, but in so many areas of my life, strobe lights have been prevalent and everywhere. Why don't we buy more disco balls instead? I do this dance move when there are strobe lights that I'm concerned might trigger a seizure. We don't have music on, but here it is if you want to take it home with you. It's like to the beat. Sans beat. Why do I share these stories and feelings around my own experience with epilepsy? Because epilepsy can be hard. Sometimes I'm not proud of it, as these stories show. Sometimes I can dance and shrug it off, but sometimes I can't, or I don't know what I need from people to cope. And I polarize those sometimes close to me and struggle with how to educate people close to me about my experience. Storytelling, though, in a room like this, where we have the diagnosis and experience in common, where we all have a chance to share our experiences and stories, makes me prouder and prouder. I'm sure there are a lot of us who are stubborn and not the most adherent to our medication, who have some in common with what I've shared. Storytelling is important. Storytelling, presenting a different perspective of the world, is important when it comes to connecting with each other. We each have our own unique experiences and relationships to epilepsy. Whether we ourselves have it, we're a loved one to it, we want to learn more about it, or we're a professional to it. Today is an opportunity to learn from one another's experiences. I would love to listen to your stories after this and hope that some of these resonate with you too. I'm definitely not the perfect example here for how to manage your epilepsy. Take your medication. It is a form of self-care and showing yourself love and showing love for others, even if you at times just wish you didn't have to manage it like most people. I'm here to remind myself that too, along with you, being transparent that I'm not at all perfect at it. So just how prevalent is epilepsy? Nearly 109,000 people have it in the state of Michigan in some form. Had to throw in Texas for scale. Nearly 292,000 people in Texas have it. And nearly 3 million people in the United States have it, which amounts to nearly 2% of the United States population. That's 1 in 50 people. We're in really great company. So why does any of this matter? I know for me, we want to belong. Speaking for myself, I outlined ways that I was around people without epilepsy who didn't get it, when I felt polarized, misunderstood, and ashamed, and like I scared people the moment I admitted I had epilepsy. How amazing is it that nearly 2% of the population has epilepsy, just like many of us in this room? We can find support and community and don't have to keep our stories and experiences a secret. We can find support and belonging. Today is a day to take advantage of resources in this room, getting to know one another and building those bridges and fostering those connections. Each person with epilepsy is a person with epilepsy. I will never pretend I understand the experiences of all people because of my own experience. I don't understand every person with epilepsy because I have it too, but I will continue to press for reducing barriers to disability inclusion, and I'm so honored to be with you today. The agenda today looks absolutely incredible. There are breakout sessions for busting stigma through stories and advocacy and connection and entering the epilepsy community. I love that. What an incredible day that we have ahead. These are such amazing opportunities for conversations, for emotional and mental wellness for all of us. From me and on behalf of the Epilepsy Foundation, happy Epilepsy Awareness Month. I'm so honored again to have been invited to be with you all today and can't wait to get to know all you more and hear your stories. Thank you so much.
I just want to say thank you again to Connie for sharing that deeply personal story with all of us. Also, thank you for being the advocate that you are for not only the epilepsy community, but for the disability community, the ability community, and for everything, all the work that you've done. So in token of that, we'd like to present you with this gift. We hope that this is a reminder to you of the lives that you've touched today, the information that you've shared, and we're very, very grateful for you traveling here today. So how about a nice big round of applause again for Connie. Thank you so much. Okay, so Connie has really set the stage for the remainder of this conference. I thought that was really, really awesome. We are so grateful that she was here to be with us today. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our next incredible speakers, Dr. Louis Dang, Dr. David Harris, and facilitator